Now, I've been playing variations of Resident Evil 4 since the GameCube, and the VR version on the Quest by Armature was a truly fantastic port, and I would recommend anyone who's a fan of the series and loves the classic version to go and check it out. But Resident Evil 4 Remake is one of the best, if not the best remake of all time, and I've spent well over 50 hours in the VR mode, and after my last video reviewing Half-Life Alyx, to figure out if it should still be considered one of the best VR games, it was clear the VR mode of Resident Evil 4 Remake was also considered by many of you one of the best VR experiences. Yesterday marked the 1-year anniversary of the VR mode, and I wanted to test out the Pro Patch after finally getting my disc drive add-on, and I wanted to see if the Pro Patch makes any noticeable difference for the VR mode and rediscover what makes the Remake and the VR mode one of the best VR games players can experience.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
In regards to the remake itself, I felt Capcom kept the core of everything that made the original brilliant, but at the same time brought it up to next-gen standards with incredible visuals, and even though there is changes to quite a few aspects of the game in comparison to the original, it still throughout felt somehow familiar, and it also set a new standard of what remakes should be going forward. In terms of the VR mode, it's interesting some of the choices Capcom have made, and obviously this isn't the first time the beloved Resident Evil series has had some VR magic added. Resident Evil 7 is still one of the best horror games I've ever played, but unless you have a PC for the VR mod, this is now locked to the original PSVR with no forwards compatibility for PSVR2, but there has been some recent rumblings of Resident Evil 7 getting a physical release on PS5 and potentially a PSVR2 VR mode, but I would keep the hype for this quite low, but it's definitely been on my mind ever since I saw the image, because it is one of the best VR horror games anyone can experience.
Welcome to the family, son.
Capcom also launched PSVR2 Resident Evil 8, which again is a fantastic VR experience, but for me it sits between Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 7 as the best Resident Evil VR game, because Resident Evil 4 isn't really a straight out horror game, it's more of an action horror, especially if you play it on a flat screen. But I would say that if you play this in VR, it's definitely got an extra level of fear added. So in terms of VR implementation, famous scenes like the lake monster can be played in first person VR mode or 3D on a cinematic screen, and this is the same for a few other important cutscenes, but most of them are shown as a floating cinema screen. Now I actually think this is a great idea because bringing flat screen game cutscenes to VR can cause major VR sickness, so the choice to view these in 3D still keeps some of the immersion, but it's a shame that all of the cutscenes are treated the same. When it comes to VR interactions, it's an interesting mix and not something I would usually praise, but there's just enough interactions to give Resident Evil 4 Remake a pass. For example, you can walk up to a crate and shoot it, throw or stab it with a knife, or simply press X. To keep immersion, I always use the knife to break things open. Unless I've run out of the knives, then obviously I'll have to press X. World environment items mostly don't react with your hands. For example, you can't pull open drawers or pick up items physically unless they're allowed, but nearly everything interacts with the knife. You can smash almost everything and books fall over and figurines smash into pieces. To open doors, you have to press X, but once they're open, you can just barge through them. With all that in mind, the world interactions are mid at best, but this is a VR port and wasn't originally developed as a VR game. However, the weapons are fantastic to use, and shooting them each provides a different level of haptics through the controllers and the headset, making the shotgun feel crazy brilliant to use. And to note, the adaptive triggers are put to excellent use too, because I actually love getting trigger pull fatigue in VR. I also love the VR menus and how you can physically attach and detach jewels from items you find to increase their value, and being up close and personal with the enemy gives you an entirely new and scary perspective, and I definitely appreciate the game world so much more in VR. If for some reason you haven't played this in VR and have already completed it on a flat screen, I promise you'll see things in this game you definitely would have missed before. And even though I've completed the game a couple of times, I'm still finding new things. There is one downside to the VR mode, and that's the use of reprojection, and unfortunately the Pro Patch does nothing to change VR. The text in the menus is still very blurry, so if you're sensitive to reprojection, try snap turn or physically turning in your space and take breaks. The actual action in Resident Evil 4 is fantastic. Taking shots at their knees and roundhousing them feels incredibly satisfying. When it comes to the gun mechanics, Capcom definitely went for the more easy easy-user approach, meaning you only need to put one shell in to reload the shotgun. I feel this is a missed opportunity because even though I chose the fully immersive version, I would love to reload every single shell. But overall, the weapon of choice for me is usually the knife, and it's the first thing I upgrade. Parrying with it is exciting, and so is stabbing the enemy once they're on the floor. You can literally see the cuts you make in their bodies, and then when they're down, you flip the knife holding R2 and stab them. And this never gets boring. Unfortunately, you don't have a body in the VR mode, but since this is really a VR mod, I kind of appreciate the rest of the work that has been put in to make this happen. When it comes to gameplay length, this is a full-fat VR adventure and takes well over 10 to 12 hours if you search around, and there's plenty of moments where you will die, and the game is a brilliant challenge. Overall, going back into this game today has reminded me how mind-blowing this game really is. The enemies have gone from something to just deal with to now being real and in my space. With all this being said, overall I've had a fantastic time today, and I still can't believe that Sony didn't actually do a Resident Evil 4 and PSVR2 bundle, because I honestly think this game is better than Resident Evil 8 and would have sold more headsets. And regardless of the PS5 Pro Patch making any differences, to be honest, the game is just absolutely fantastic and should be in every PSVR2 owner's library. Thank you ever so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.